Good evening, everybody, members of the committee. Welcome to this meeting of the Family and Children's Services Select Committee. I'm Councillor Will Pascal, Chair of the committee, and I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. The event is live streamed on YouTube, and members of the public and media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussion taking place. Now, I'd also like to welcome all of those in the Commission Room 1 at Luton Town Hall and everybody watching on YouTube. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would also ask everyone present to please make sure that your mobiles are on silent or switched off. And we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you, everybody. I have apologies for absence received from Councillor Emma Dent Code, Councillor David Lindsay, Richard Durecki, and Estella Gomez. Also note that Kathleen Williams is not here. Well, so any other apologies? Thank you. Has any member of the committee, any particular pecuniary interest there tonight?
It's not a pecuniary interest, but just relating to item 5, I should just declare that I'm on the Education and Partnership Board.
Right, and I should declare that I'm a governor of Marlborough and Coldwell Primary Schools as well. So if we can proceed to the minutes first of all. I wasn't the chair of the meeting this pertains to, but has anybody got any items of correctness or do with action arising that's not in the agenda tables as an action to be taken? Take those to spread. So you're really happy to approve those?
Yes,
Thank you very much. So if we could move on to agenda item 4. Sorry, pardon me, we've got an alteration in order batting. But we can take the paper A5, school inclusion policy, first before. So, by way of introduction, this provides details of the ongoing implementation impact of the 5-hour exclusion strategy, with most up-to-date validated data, suspensions, exclusions, and attendance. I'd like to welcome Wasim Fat, who's the Director of Alternative Provision and Special Educational Needs at the Ormston Academy Trust. And thank him for joining us tonight. And it's very good to meet him. And we'll be joined by Council Courts, Sporting Officer, and Council Help on any questions you may have. So, Catherine, would you like to do an introduction to this?
I'll do a very short introduction. Firstly, I would like to welcome Councillor Pascal as the new chair of the Family and Children's Services. And also, again, thank you very much, Wasim, to come. Wasim really is the expert on this, so it's fantastic to have him here with us tonight. I really welcome this paper because it's something we always get a lot of questions about, and quite rightly, people are really concerned about what happened to our children who, for whatever reason, have to step out of their school, whether on a very short-term space of time or on a longer space of time. And I'm not going to go into it because it's all very well detailed in this paper, but I hope what everyone will pick up from it actually is the numbers of permanent exclusions and how incredibly small they are, because it's something we always get levelled at us as to how bad we are at permanent exclusions. And actually, I think all the early intervention work and all the work we put in supporting our families and children to prevent them from being in circumstances where they have to be suspended or excluded from the schools is really effective. So I welcome this committee bringing this paper because I think it's what everybody would like to hear more about. I'll hand over to Ian, who will give you a more detailed response.
Thank you, Kath. Now, I'll be really brief because you'll hear a bit more from Asim about the range of alternative provision and outreach supports. There's a lot more than the core provision at Latin or Alternative Provision Academy. I know that Natasha wants to talk about the range of provision available to really help, and particularly for children affected by Grenfell. But building on what Catherine said, I hope that the couple of charts we've included in this report do give you an insight, a snapshot into some of the data. You'll know, and I guess many of you may have clicked the link to see the school inclusion strategy launch, some time ago now. That sets the whole framework for today's report and also the action plan. Just a flag, and Amanda, you mentioned your role on the Education Partnership Board. That is our most senior strategic education body. It's chaired by our Executive Director of Children's Services, Sarah Newman, and one of the core priorities for that board is to monitor progress with the school inclusion strategy, to ask officers and other colleagues such as myself challenging questions where perhaps enough focus isn't being given to a certain area, and be really alive to feedback, particularly from head teachers and governors who are on that board. So that gives you a bit of the strategic context. I'm just going to comment on some of the data, if you'll bear with me. So on page 16, 2.3, we start with our latest attendance data. Now, probably a frustration that I know Catherine and I share is that we're often looking backwards at validated data produced by the Department for Education. And there is more recent anecdotal data, but it isn't for every school. And I would hesitate to share that with you or in the public domain when we know the DfE hasn't checked this. So for attendance in 2.3, you'll see that we have attendance data, which is validated for all of our state schools here in KNC up to July last year, the end of the academic year. And you can see it's self-evident from the graph that we're slightly above national, in line with London. But what I would say is, for Children's Services, we're really proud to be judged outstanding by Ofsted in our last inspection. We're waiting for another inspection, and I know you've spoken previously within the future about the work that's happening across children's and particularly in family services. But given that's the bar we set ourselves in the North Borough, I would very much hope that we can improve our attendance from being in line with national and London. It's a really challenging area, I think, for us and for our schools. And I won't summarise all of the activity that's underway. It's set out in the report. And Natasha has a brilliant attendance lead, and her early help workers do a lot of work in this space, as well as the schools themselves. But I will just flag in 2.4 that the Department for Education, who have had a real focus since COVID on improving school attendance, came to visitors, and actually, given that our performance is roughly in line with national average, their feedback to us and to Natasha was, actually, we think you're doing everything you can in this space, and we would always challenge ourselves to say there's always more we could do. But that just gives you a snapshot of attendance data. Catherine's already referred in 2.5 to permanent exclusion, what has always been called exclusion. But let me just say something about the chart at the top of page 17, which is our suspensions data, which used to be called fixed term exclusions. So in other words, a temporary exclusion from school. It could be for a day, a couple of days. If it is more than 5 days, then that mainstream school that's put that suspension in place is required to arrange education for the child. Sometimes that might be through an agreement with Ormiston, and you'll hear a little bit more about that later. So let's look at our data. You'll know that the inclusion strategy pretty much arose from the fact that 5 or 6 years ago now, our fixed term exclusion rate, it was a little bit above the London average, national average. We took that very seriously. put the strategy in place, and we did see a reduction in numbers leading up to COVID. Obviously, exclusion and suspension rates were very low during COVID because children were not in school for many months, and we've seen nationally and locally, as you'll see here, an increase in the suspension rates. And the measure here, the validated data, I'm afraid takes us to over a year ago. So that last month, the last season there rather, is spring 23. So that's the latest validated data. All of our Stoke schools here in KNC, regardless of where children live, the measure is against suspension rates in our schools. Just to explain a bit about what that rate consists of, in 2.7, you'll see actually it equates to about 320 pupils, because it's the suspension rate, and actually that rate is higher than the number of pupils, because sadly there are pupils, a number of pupils who are suspended more than once. Now we can come on, I'm sure, through your questions and through what we'll see on Natasha say about the reasons why our rate is what it is. I want to be really upfront with you. It's higher than we would want it to be. We are picking up individual schools. Some of our secondary schools are saying, well, gosh, compared to a year ago, our suspension rate has gone down. And I'd love to bring that data back to you when the DfE have validated it. What we have done is included a couple of quotes from recent Ofsted inspection reports where they allude to suspensions. So those are the key areas of data that I wanted to flag. And we're very much in your hands, Chair, if you wanted to pause for any questions on the data, or I could hand straight over to Wasim to talk about the Ormiston's offer.
Well, maybe it'd be useful just to go quickly around
of course
on the data. Starting off, I personally can see the bind here with regard to validation of data. However, as I've declared, being a governor of 2 schools, I know that the senior leadership team have current data for their own school. And what's more, they update that every single week.
Yes.
And validate it internally across the whole senior leadership team. And therefore, it would be the wrong picture, I think, to give the understanding to the public that as far as individual schools are concerned, that if like they are in the position in validated data. On the other hand, it'd be wrong to use unvalidated data.
Yes.
But just to the individual governing bodies and senior leadership team of individual schools do act on the data that they have. And that I know from experience, not only within those 2 schools, but talking to heads and governors of other schools, that they allocate resources and priorities with a great emphasis to follow this lead, if you like, by Ofsted and yourselves and so on. So I think it slightly underrates the effort that's being put in by schools. Maybe there are 1 or 2 schools I don't know about which don't do that, and they're more interested in something else. But my experience is, anecdotal that it is and unvalidated it is that the senior leadership teams, governors that maintain schools in the borough, are completely on point with regard to this issue and have very up-to-date data and react week by week. And one of the things that they really focus on is getting to know not only their child, but their child's family, which may be parents in a sort of traditional way, or maybe carers, or however it's organised. So that's what so maybe we have quick questions from around the table. Councillor Lowe, if we start with you. Is there anything you want to add to this just on the data, not on this?
No, not on the data, thank you.
I have a very quick question. Just following on to what Councillor the Chair said, how different is the data that's published, compared to the schools having it on tap, on a weekly basis? Has there been a huge difference in the past?
So I think there's a couple of things here. So schools are, rightly inspected, and Ofsted comes around on their own school's data. And Will's absolutely right. Of course, teacher governors will want to present the very latest data they have for their school. When we're inspected for children's services as a whole, obviously attendance rates across the local authority suspension rates on what they look at here. What we would do, of course, at the local authority level is draw in the experience of individual schools and talk about strategies that they would adopt, so how they might work with us, and particularly early help in partnership. I suppose the point to add is that you all know that schools individually are responsible for trying to improve their attendance rate and taking prompt action where children are becoming persistent absentees. So in other words, their attendance is below 90%, and if they then meet the definition of a severe absentee, which is below 50%, I think part of our work and the work of Natasha's team is to make sure that where schools, typically on average in the first 4 weeks where attendance has been a concern, if they can't resolve it in that first 4 weeks, that they will be turning to Natasha's team, local authority, or Wisdom, or for help and support. So it's a bit of a two-tiered answer, but I hope that helps a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Sonia.
Mine is, well, actually, I suppose it is a question. It's a question and a comment. It's the drum I always bang, I'm afraid, and that's the difference between suspensions and permanent exclusion. So we're alarmed to see suspensions going up. We're seeing that spring 23 is affecting 320 pupils. As I'm always saying, it's part, and I completely agree with you, by the way, about all the data that's used in schools on a regular basis, whether it's attendance data, suspension data, we're on it, and completely up to date. So here, it looks very alarming to see 320 pupils are affected. And then the comparison appears to be, but we've only got 5 children permanently excluded. But of course, the years are out of whack. I don't think it's very helpful to have had that figure published for the 21-22, which is the last validated figure, but we don't have the equivalent suspension figure there. And then you're flagging the suspension figure here, but we don't have the exclusion figure here. The whole point about fixed term suspensions used in conjunction with alternative provision is you're teaching your children how to behave, how to become productive members of society, and how to avoid permanent exclusion. So back in 21-22, actually, we were getting it right. We don't know what we are here. So I think you've just got to be a bit careful looking at the data as it stands, as presented.
I think that's a really good point, Amanda. And obviously, I'm regularly in meetings with the DFE, and it would be great if they could give us aligned, more up-to-date data. I think what's really key for me is I wanted to demonstrate in this report what the national and London comparators are, and these are the most recent comparators we have. And you're absolutely right; they're not aligned. And I think part of our discussion tonight is, extrapolating the data and maybe not drawing too many conclusions from it. All I would say on permanent exclusion rates, of course, we want to see the 22-23 figures, but actually they have been very low compared to national for a long time here in KNC. So I hope that's a fairly reliable trend.
So what that says to me, and I can again use anecdotal evidence from the 2 schools I'm involved in, one secondary, one primary, as you know, we're pretty tough in our behaviour policies, but at the same time they're not punitive. Their behaviours for learning policies. They're very encouraging. They're trying to teach children by example how to behave. They are always adapted for anybody with special educational needs. So whilst it always appears alarming to see a good proportion of suspended children having special educational needs, there is context around that, and it has to be recognised.
Can I just add that I completely share your frustration about not knowing the current figures? And as Ian will know, I'm always saying, can't you just tell me the current figures? No, they're not validated. And I guess that's because all the schools do they not all send them through to us?
I think that there's something definitely for me, and I suppose it's my perspective, that I don't want to ask schools for data unnecessarily. Obviously we've got a mixture of local authority maintained schools and schools, academies and preschools maintained by the DFE. So I'm sure if Natasha and I did ask, schools would submit additional data to us. But actually, schools are really busy. They're monitoring their own data, as a number of you said already, and it would be at best anecdotal. What I can say is we'll continue to talk to the DfE about whether, so the live attendance data that our, previous Secretary of State was referred to, we can't quite extrapolate that in the same way locally, and we might draw the wrong conclusions from it, and there wouldn't be a national and London comparison either.
Yeah, but I think my point is, we would have the 21-22 data, so we could have put those side by side. And then go on to say at the moment, we don't have exclusion data, but we can give you the fuller picture on suspensions.
That's a good point.
Thanks, Chairman. Just quick point. It'd be useful to know exactly what the metric is, because the comparisons are useful. When it says 93%, is that on any given day, on average, 93% of children are there? Or is it 93% of children are predominantly there throughout the year? Or so just the exact metric that it's measuring.
So that's the average attendance rate over that term.
So on an average day, 93% of children would be
over
present.
that term. Yeah, in fact, because the measure now takes us up to the end of the academic year.
Okay.
That's the kind of look back over the year to say 93. I got to add to what I said there in the session.
I think that's
That's good to know, because I wasn't sure exactly what the metric was. My question was about truancy, and so when we're looking at 7% sort of on average not attending, what percentage of those are truants and what percentage have been excluded? And also, how strong is the connection between the two? Does truancy normally often lead to exclusions, and are too closely?
So schools would measure that using the kind of the DfE requirements and categorise absence as authorised or unauthorised. I'm trying to say a bit more.
I just meant truancy versus presumably that 93%. The 7% absent, some of them will be excluded, some will.
No, the exclusion rates wouldn't be included.
That's an authorised. Okay.
And there are a number of authorised categories. It could be illness.
Mm.
It could be agreed period of absence because a child needs some particular family thing. I mean, they don't agree very much of it, but there are a range of codes that they can code to.
Yeah.
There's also within this codes which are for children persistently late. And actually, persistent lateness really affects children's engagement with learning. Really big deal. So that's also captured. And if you get into for secondary, I think in some primary, just past a certain point in the morning, if you miss a certain amount of minutes, then actually you're marked as absent for the whole session because actually then you can't engage fully. So it's quite complicated, all the codes. And truancy also, just as a thought, truancy kind of slightly implies annoying teenagers out and about kicking around. The range of reasons why children don't go to school that aren't authorised are really complex, which is why we've developed an approach which is kind of a whole family approach, because it could be an older child who just said to mum, I'm going to school and dad, but actually then bunks off, as we'd call it. But actually a lot of it is children whose parents are struggling in some way. They're either struggling to manage the child's behaviour, so find it hard to insist the child goes to school. I see there's this really way putting away, or the child is struggling, particularly post-pandemic. We've had lots of children exhibiting much higher levels of anxiety. Again, you'll have heard this from your heads. So it's a real range, and I think truancy, we used to see it with the old truant patrols back in the day. Really, there aren't that many, and actually, there are many on the street anymore. They're in their bedrooms.
Sorry, can I add that the biggest factor, I think, in both our schools is actually parents taking the children out early at the end of the summer term and bringing them back late in the autumn term or around Christmas. And it's all about the price of holidays and flights home. So, for example, in North Kensington, we have particular nationals, say, going home to visit families. You can understand the family doing that. It's difficult for them, and that they can take 2 weeks a year.
I think we're beginning to get off the data and on to what to do about it.
Can I just quickly add something? Because the point Tom made, which Ian made earlier, is that actually attendance is our real concern at the moment, because you're quite right. If they're not attending, that can lead on down the line to them spending and moving into this cohort of children. And also it is that, as you rightly said, it's COVID has changed the whole attitude to parents. So if it's raining, I don't go to school till it's raining. So we've really seen a whole host of new issues arising since then.
And also parents working from home.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
If I could just say that this does give, it means that this paper is to a certain extent divided into two halves, because we have the first half we've been discussing so far, which is discussing historical data.
Yes.
And then take a deep breath and go into what we want to do now and in the future, which is must be related to real-time data now, because otherwise it's going to be pretty. But so the simple question there is, you can't give me the numbers. Do you think from the anecdotal evidence that you see that the direction of travel is going in the right direction at least?
Well, I think in terms of the perm substitution rate, I mean, I think you'll hear a little bit more of seeing shortly, but unlike a lot of local authorities, we have a really mature system in place whereby secondary schools in particular will commission placements at Ormiston, very much focused on a whole range of alternatives to permanent exclusion. And sadly, that doesn't exist in all parts of the country, but it does here. Suspension rates, I might turn to us completely anecdotally what your sense is and what the call is on your services where there are
before, and I very much like to hear from you, but just to say that at the end of the paper, the very end of the paper, there is this graphic,
a pyramid of support and intervention.
Which
Yes,
I thought would be very useful to the beginning of the paper, because actually it's this point in the paper, but it explains how all the different parts fit together on the paper. But if we could ask Wazim to tell us about Ormiston, his role,
sure.
If you like, in the sort of more vanilla, traditional, that's the way of putting it, people coming to your organisation, and then also touch on outreach and improving skills in schools. Right, that should be very.
No, thank you.
Thank you
If there's
very much for
anything,
coming.
not at all. If there's anything I haven't answered, do come back and ask and steer me to the right bits. I think I'll cover some of the anecdotal information here as well. So I think as you've introduced me, I work for Ormiston Academies Trust. We're a large multi-academy trust. We have 42 schools across the country, 32 secondary, 6 primary, 3 AP, 1 being in RBKC, and especially in Suffolk for children with PMLD, so profound and multiple learning difficulties. And we're about to, as some of you have already alluded, we're about to take on, which is hopefully now in the public knowledge, Queensmill, the Queensmill Trust, which is 2 schools, 1 in Hammersmith and 1 here in Ladbroke Grove, the Kensington Queensmill School, and they have special resource spaces as well. So we're, our approach is about inclusion. We go where the challenge is greatest, and in fact, in terms of inclusion, I think it's really important just to share that we work across 18 plus local authorities, and the work we're doing here, we're really proud of, working in partnership with colleagues in RBKC. So I think it's just worth saying, having worked in 18 plus local authorities across the country. I think the first thing just to add is that if you define inclusion, no one actually says we're inclusive or not inclusive. No school or no local authority will say we're not inclusive. So inclusion by definition, I think what we do, and I say we in the broader sense, what we do in this local authority is remove those barriers to ensure that the different strands of provision on offer to the children, the most vulnerable children in this borough, equip them for their pathways post-16, and the data reflects that it's higher than the national average. So more children are still in employment or educational training post-16 than there would be in other in other local authorities. So in terms of our approach, hasn't been typically we took on Latimer, which was part of the TVAP Trust in September 21. So this is nearly 3 years. And I think the work we've done over the last 3 years has been on redesigning what is AP. What is it? Because it isn't the place that parents want children to go to. You know that. There's a narrative, and actually redesigning what it is means that the inclusion strategy, it's not part of the strategy where it's you don't want children to go there. There's an acknowledgement, and I think that's referenced, or at least recognised within the high needs. The amount of capital, the amount of funding to support those most vulnerable children. It's about ensuring that if they do go to AP, it's the best AP in this country, and it's going to give the best chances possible. And so redesigning it has meant we've had investment in outreach, which you touched on, Chair. So outreach isn't just, light touch going into schools with the children. There's a big sort of training element to it for staff, for Senkos as well, who are the key skilled people, the experts in those schools, really supporting them with, the kind of not just the per pupil, but per class support as well. So there's a huge training element for schools around the outreach team. It has currently the outreach team works across 3 local authorities, and you have a dedicated team in RBKC, which has been enhanced and developed over the last 18 months. So we're really proud of the work of the outreach team. And the data will also, I won't read it all, but it tells you that most children after outreach intervention are still in mainstream school. And that's a really positive indicator. Of course, there are some children who then move along that inclusion continuum. And we have, again, part funded by the high needs funding, we have a managed intervention centre. So typically, this is a very short-term placement for children for up to 5 weeks, secondary children. And those children, again, the percentage of success, we're talking nearly 80% of those children for the last 12 months. I won't reference validated or unvalidated data, but the last 12 months, those children are still in mainstream school. And so you've got your outreach, you've now got your managed intervention centre, really short-term satellite provision of Latimer. And then finally, the AP bit, which is where there are some small numbers, but permanent exclusions, and there are some what we term as managed moves. And those are agreed with parents, with the school, and parents in collaboration with services that may or may not be part of the conversation at that point, to really ensure that the conversations for that child start with what is positive, what does positive change look like? How do we ensure that this child, that Latimer in this case, isn't the destination? It is part of the journey to ensure that they move into a more appropriate post-16. Some of those children will be reintegrated, but you'll see again the data, most children are referred in year 10, year 11. So they're already 14, 15 or 16. So they tend to stay and complete their GCSEs. Latimer is Ofsted good. So, it's been and has been for the last 2 years. It's, the Westminster equivalent was also inspected recently. So we're really proud of all our APs in London. And Latimer is actually our, as it stands, also now finally has a special resource base as well. A really, innovative model of delivery. Part of this is because I think, yes, the AP and SEND improvement plan was, published in 2023, but I think we were having these conversations in 2022. And so we're really proud that actually last month, was it 6 weeks ago, we launched Preston Junction, which is the special resource provision at Latimer on the ground floor, a very special designated resource base for children with obviously social, emotional, mental health, but also autism. And so it's the primary need is not just behaviour. They all have education healthcare plans. The commissioning is via the Julie Ely and Ian's team. So it's a really tight monitoring of those children. And it's we're launching actually on the 18th of July. So you're all very welcome to attend. You should get the invites out. But that is a very unique thing in the country. It's not something that's been done having an AP with a special resource base. And so, we've got a real, we've taken that model and we've taken it to other parts of the country, but we're really pleased and proud of what we're about to do in Quincy. So that's a really quick 5 minutes on the continuum, as I call it, outreach, the satellite provision, the AP, and now the special resource base at Latimer, to give you an idea of the services.
Sonia, I think you had a question, did you not, on this one?
No.
To do with a different parts of the inclusion strategy fit together.
Oh yes, I didn't think that had been covered. So this is for 4.7 and 2.15.
Okay.
But I'm happy to go first.
Well, if you prefer to wait, then Amanda, if you'd like to.
I have the misfortune sometimes to chair exclusion panels, and as you rightly said, parents don't want it, do they? It's always the thing that is very scary for them, which is very understandable. it's always explained to them how very successful your provision is, where, you know, if it transpires that the child is excluded. The one argument that they always make is you just don't offer the breadth of GCSEs that our schools in this borough do. And so it might have an even greater negative impact on these children if the very thing that perhaps was the hook to keep them in school, keep them incentivized, is then taken away from them. I do understand, you know, you can't do everything. So I just wonder if you have any plans to widen that.
It's incredible. I mean, I'm not going to anecdotally, it's a very broad and balanced offer compared to some aid providers nationally. However, there are some limitations. For example, you know, we wouldn't offer languages because there isn't the, unfortunately, because the mobility, the fluidity of the pupil population requires you to deliver the core and get them, the primary thing being getting them back into school. So in some respects, you would see it as a short-term thing. The reality is that some of the parents who, once they visited, we've had children on the flip side who don't want to leave, and it's really difficult to get them out of school. So, right, you've got to get back into school and get back onto completing your EBAC subjects and your languages, etc. The thing is that, and I call it the thing because they're not there because they can't access French or dance or drama. They're there because, unfortunately, their needs cannot be met for whatever reason. And sometimes I think there's a bit of respite needed for services to come together and really formulate a careful plan about what's the right thing for this child. And sometimes it's about ensuring that it's a bit of a short, sharp shock as well. And actually ensuring that the child, because within the school, whether it's 1,000 children or 1,500 children, the school has to manage within the behaviour policy, etc. So I think the reasons aren't because of access, isn't to do with the curriculum always. I think it's over the negativity or the perception. And some of the parents have experienced it as well. They've been in the system. So we get that with parents who, you know, I've talked and then they've come back and said, you know, it's really incredible. You know, that's unfortunately what you'll think. You've got to break that cycle. So I think there's a bigger piece for us around perception rather than the curriculum thing. I think we can steer it towards more opportunities and employability and pathways. We'll probably get even more success, which is what we want to do. I was saying to Ian a couple of weeks ago, we want to do more on our website around alumni. You know, I had a boy during an Ofsted recently who came in, he's off to university to do teacher training. I was like, I need to get you on my website. And, you know, that's the thing I need to do. You know, that's the thing that's missing.
Could I ask Councillor Nur, because I think you wanted to ask a question about post intervention.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Well, my question is, we know that exclusion takes place for some reasons. When children are excluded from school, this is speaking to a lot of parents on my ward capacity. The child is doing very well at the year 7, year 8, year 9. Something happens in school. They've been sent away for a number of weeks. So my question is, when they're in the alternative provision, is it teacher-led? Do they follow the national curriculum? Is that fed back to the school? Are the parents involved? And my last question on this is also, there's reports and parents' feedback saying exclusion has resulted children having a gap in their learning. So the child was doing fine before they do mistake. They've been sending off because the school feels their presence will jeopardize the safety of other children. But when they come back, they have either one level or two lower than the age group, and that will carry on till their year 11, which result they don't get GCSE they're required to get.
There's lots of questions there, but I'll try and wrap it up I'll try and summarize it. So I think I went back to the data, said most children will access a short-term intervention placement in one of our managed intervention centres. It's 98% still in school. So that's the intro I'll share with you. Is there a risk that they will fall behind in some areas? Yeah, there is always that risk. But the thing is, that 98% are then able to be back in school, working closely with their staff the thing that we're trying to do is ensure that they stay in school and continue and to be successful. The risk is that, considering that they are taught by subject teachers, specialist subject teachers, actually percentage, a very small percentage, you don't unfortunately stay in that provision. It's not because the school has, and I think my personal view is that exclusion should be seen as a strategy to support. And we've got to accept that it's part of the school's behaviour policy, but inclusion policy, it is one thing that they'll have multiple things that they do. And that's the thing sometimes missing. And actually, Amanda, your point earlier about suspensions, in terms of the number of children who have SEND or don't have SEND, schools will sometimes suspend when children don't have SEND, then put them on the SEND register. So the data you've got there in terms of the number of children who've got SEN support, well, they're on that because they now need support. So it's a bit of a catch-22, if you like.
Not in either of my schools.
I know, but it's a good thing to put them on SEN support, because it means now they're going to have learning mentors, or they'll have additional therapy or additional support in class. So I think the children that you're talking about in terms of the outcomes, the only thing I could say is that, of course, there is a risk because they've been suspended and they're out of school. They're going to miss learning. Their attendance probably have multiple factors. Their attendance will probably be low. They may be truants. They may have other things going on in their life. But the time away hopefully gives people an opportunity to reset. And because 98% is still in school. And that's the thing I would focus on.
Could I just add one point? You made a really interesting point about where children might fall behind their learning due to suspension, and you talked about the different phases of education. And I think what we see nationally and locally is, we've got a very small number of children who require support at primary. It has been growing, and part of Natasha's team and the support we offer, obviously, is working with primary too. But sometimes that transition to secondary can trigger a change, adapting to having, 11 teachers, not one primary school teacher, a whole different range of support staff. And I think our secondary schools, I have to say, we've got some of the best secondary schools in the country, are really mindful of that. And there's a lot of work that happens in terms of transition support, particularly with our local schools, and some of our secondary schools, have many primary school feeders, but they have a particular focus on the most vulnerable to try and make sure that transition is as positive as it can be. I mean, this is probably a couple of years ago now. So I remember at Chelsea Academy, where I attended the governing body, and the previous head said we've noticed that actually, our fixed term exclusion rate, as it was called then, it's really high in year 7, and we're really concerned about this. We have to follow our exclusions policy, and I know probably a couple of years ago now they spoke to yourself, Natasha, and your team to say what can we do differently working with early help. See, there's other organisations like West London Zone as well, and that school actually saw a significant drop in their suspension rate in year 7, but quite rightly, in my view, governors and the head teacher were all over it, monitoring the data through the head's report, saying this is a really vulnerable point for children in transition. It doesn't mean that they changed their behaviour policy or their expectations, but they did adopt some different approaches, and it led to reduction in suspensions and hopefully reduction in students who might have, as you say, gaps in their learning.
Well, what we will do is actually be mindful of the data and the trends and adapt. And we have done in the last 18 months or so. So our outreach team that we were referencing actually now deliver the transition year 6 to 7 program to support vulnerable children in the Byborough. But obviously in KNC, it's about those year 6, that change. And I'm saying earlier about the transition phases. So we're not just going to say carry on doing what we're doing because it's great. Actually, the trends are telling us year 7 is something happening there.
I think it's also.
Yeah, I was just interested to know. I imagine one of the biggest challenges you have is that if your child is behaving very badly, it's spent time at school, your first instinct is the last thing I want is for him or her to be around other kids who are behaving badly. So how do you manage that, sort of having kids who have problem behaviours all in together so that they don't just encourage each other? And
really good question. So I think I'll just flip it quickly and then come back to that. I think more important or more difficult is actually the different postcodes.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people say, well, how do you bring children from the south of the borough to the north of the borough? Like, how do you bring all these children together? And I think it's about everyone has such a, they're in a state of like, what now? They've had the biggest sanction possible. They're out of school. there is no other sanction, if you like. It's about that first meeting. It's about how there's a dynamic risk assessment of the type, where they are, what their behaviours are, who's what, where. But actually the idea that you create this pathway from the minute they walk through that door, what is the pathway for that child? And there is that constant, and that's why, alternative provision is expensive, because it has the specialist staff who have the time and the capacity to do that work. So they're far more reactive to behaviour issues, far more likely to manage those things than they are in a mainstream school. And I think you create these bubbles, if you like, of teams working with those most vulnerable groups of the year 7 being a very tiny minority in our provision. But actually year 10 and 11, it's a huge number. You're bringing them together. Some of those year 10 and 11 will get reintegrated. Some won't. And it's about those individual pathways, working really closely with those teams within the school who are, when I say skilled, they make me look like an amateur. They are incredibly skilled, who are able to unpick behaviour and ensure that it's integrated work with therapy, your therapists and early help, and the youth offending team. The number of services that we have in our AP, it's that integrated approach to supporting them, and families as well. Families are you've said parents, they don't know where to go. Create that. I was saying earlier to colleagues about that cradle to career approach. We get them early. We can really see them through and really ensure that there is a pathway.
Just quickly, when I've visited your school, I've always seen tiny numbers of children in class, often 1-to-1. What would be your largest class size?
Maximum 8.
Yeah,
and that would be a year 11 class. So you're looking typically year 7, 8 and 9, maximum 5 or 6 in a class.
And just on the points of numbers, I've seen this. I've been working with AP for a long time now in the various boroughs, but actually the current position here in Kent Chelsea and in Westminster is that the provision, which is predominantly 11 to 16, is full. And there is something there about that national picture. We spoke earlier about trying to get children back into school. We do know that in some instances, and we're going down the anecdotal route now, is that actually everybody works really hard doing the family to get the child back into school, but actually they may not be dying to be back on that first day or second day. Being with their peers again in and out different lessons, particularly at secondary, can sadly lead to some quite challenging behaviour, which sadly then can lead to a suspension. So given the range of alternatives we have to permanent exclusion, including managed moves into Latimer, you are full. But there's a linked point, which is exactly your point, Tom, about parents saying, "Gosh, I'm not sure I want my child to go to be in that setting." I know there's some brilliant specialist teachers there, but I wonder whether, given that the great majority of children in alternative provision are either identified as SEN support or have an education health and care plan, or actually their needs then become clearer when they're in AP, and then we're seeing the team will actually say, "We're going to put you forward for an EHC needs assessment." When we set up together Preston Junction, which is a special resource space within the main AP, Julie was saying to me, when you consult with parents, obviously they're able to give a preference, ideally a couple of preferences. Every single parent where a conversation was had to say, "What about coming to Preston Junction at Latimer? Come and have a look." Every single parent we consulted with SEN said, "Yes, I want my child to go there." And that's pretty special for us, excuse the pun, in AP, where we've got the offer, parents won't take it up.
Can I pick up on, because we're reaching our time limit on service. Unfortunately, we could go on. There's very fruitful area. I sense that there's a lot in this discussion. I also sense that we've got the Preston Junction, we've got the Queensmill arrangement, about to come to fruition, and then you're developing your outreach and your skills dissemination to schools. That maybe later on in the year it would be worth, not in the foreseeable future, but maybe sometime in early spring, it would be sensible for us to come and visit if we could do that.
Absolutely.
And learn more, because this seems to be an important area, but also one that could become the answer to every problem that exists, and therefore completely unresourceable. So there's a balance to be struck here, and it would be useful to pick up on how the balance is being struck, and that very useful triangle. Now, I'm also aware that in this paper that there was both Tom and Sonia wanted to ask a question in relation to 4.7. Yes.
Sure, I'll go first. So yes, just a more specific question, because I think the report's really good. But at 4.7, it's written that promoting anti-racist practice to tackle the disproportionate representation of specific ethnicities in exclusion data. And from that, I sort of take it that the implication is that racism is one of the causes of exclusion for some peoples. Is it true that this is one of the sort of reasons why students are excluded, and is there data to back that up? And then, so second question is around the program of master classes, and as you mentioned, sort of authentic representation through the curriculum. Are you able to elaborate a little bit on what those master classes are? So I presume it's a training for teachers and that sort of thing. And yeah, I don't know, Tom, if you want to.
Well, just to add on, because otherwise it'll be, I don't want to just repeat your question, but specifically on ensuring authentic representation through the curriculum. I mean, that one worried me slightly, because I mean that seems like influencing the curriculum, which is a big deal. And looking at, because I know the Timpson review is quoted extensively in the paper, so I took a look at the Timpson review. A lot of the things it raises are absolutely addressed, particularly in 4.6, which is great to see. But when it comes to ethnicity, and it spends quite a while talking about ethnicity, so it's like it's incredibly complex. Some ethnicities mentions Bangladeshi. I think Nigerian British do better than white British. Others don't do as well. There's a lot of overlap with other issues. At no point, though, does it, and it says basically some more research is needed in the area. Is the implication. But no point does it mention ensuring authentic representation through the curriculum is a way of addressing this wider issue. So I just wondered, if you could dig more into that and the classes that Sonia made, and are we trying to influence the curriculum here? And if so, what's the evidence for doing that?
Really helpful questions, and thank you for raising those points. And I guess the key area in 4.7, obviously there's lots more data we could share with you, is really about looking at disproportionality and looking at the makeup of our cohort of children in AP, looking at the makeup of children who are suspended, and that may be around gender, that may be around free school meals, or not on free school meals, and it's also about the ethnic makeup of that cohort. And we do see disproportionality in that data, and I know schools themselves track performance progress by looking at those various groups, including ethnic makeup as well. And that's what we, I think, with the schools who probably asked us to work with them on this, but that's what we're seeking to track here. I mean, in terms of some of the, and you're right, to top of page 22, some of the masterclasses and the best practice events that have taken place, a lot of that started following the Black Lives Matter movement and the request from schools across the two boroughs to say, actually, can you, the local authority, broker discussions between us all so we can come together, talk about some of these issues, have a look at the data, at local authority level. The schools are saying, well, actually, we're seeing some worrying trends here in our data, but we're a really small primary school. Can you give us a bigger data set? And we have been looking at that. If I give you a further example, through the Rental Education Fund Steering Group that I chair, our Rental Dedicated Service very regularly are seeking the views of young people about the support they're getting in our schools. Some still living locally to the Tower, others, having moved a bit further away. And it was a relatively small survey of secondary age children, bereavement survivor children, who said one of their areas the feedback was in terms of curriculum and the resources that our schools use. We don't all see people who look like us in those resources. Now, that for me was a discussion point to take to the steering group, to take to our secondary heads group, to say, Here's a feedback from a relatively small sample of young people affected by Grenfell. What do you think about that feedback? Does that match what you're hearing in your own school? And it's actually led to some really interesting discussions at the Grenfell Steering Group, and that would be another example of a child facing multiple vulnerabilities. A number of children who badly affected by Grenfell were already vulnerable before the fire. And so having that discussion, a number of schools said, actually, we'd like to carry out that survey with a large group of young people, for instance, at KAA. Really interesting discussions with the previous principal of KAA, with his fellow heads about the curriculum and how you might work with young people to maybe adapt resources. I remember David Benson, head of KAA, saying, well, you can't exactly decolonise the maths curriculum, and he just said that, and we talked about that, but actually, in history and in English, make two examples. Let's talk to our students and see what they think about our resources and how we can adapt them.
It strikes me
A few reflections really there.
this is a very complex subject and a very important, interesting one. I'm wondering whether the best way forward for this committee is if we could ask officers to give a bit more considered information in a briefing note, but for information purposes for the committee, because if we should discuss this one at length now without having all the information available to us. So would that be a reasonable request to officers?
Is this up to date? No, I was just going to say, we have here the whole disproportionality of ethnicity, disability, gender, which is really sort of going down into the sort of data, the granular data of it all. So I was just asking if this is up to date, this old one.
If it isn't, we can get you another one.
Yeah. So I think it might be really helpful for you to all look at this, because it's like it's only when you get on the granular level and you see how complex all these things are.
Very happy just to say that particularly relates to children who are getting support in some way from family services. And again, if we look at that group of young people, we do see quite a lot of disproportionality in that data. We'd be really happy to share it through a briefing note with some extra information, or using
and it's not straightforward. So there are people from a whole range of ethnic origins who are living lives where their children aren't disproportionately affected by school exclusion, serious youth violence, coming into care. But there are children who are, and it's the intersection between poverty, how people got here, the trauma they have, their experience of living in this country, then possibly the extra layer possibly of learning disability, which may or may not be treated and diagnosed early enough. They may or may not have had access to resources. They may or may not have used really good quality childcare. Between 0 to 5, quality childcare will spot if your child's got the layer of speech delay. If you have a level of those issues that intersect, those are the people that we need. We use the data to drill down and think, right, where could we have targeted them earlier? So what we're called Sure Start Centres, now Family Hub, they are the places we're trying to make sure we bring people in so that they aren't disproportionately affected then later in being excluded or poor school attendance or not achieving what they could do. Because there are loads of children here who achieve brilliantly. I mean, look at the school results, they speak for themselves. So our job is to try and find and early on spot the children from the data trends, from where they live, which primary schools they go to, which is why my North Kent inclusion programme targeted those very specific secondary schools and primary schools with that additional family.
Natasha, I think
that's a very good point.
Yeah.
So I think if it's about disproportionality and understanding that obviously each student will come from a different background and have had different experiences through their life. This is specifically anti-racism training, and I was sort of seeking to understand whether racism is a cause of exclusion.
So you were asking whether the children's behaviour, racist behaviour, sorry.
Yes, so it is racism. Is there data that shows that racism is a sort of major cause for suspension and exclusion? And if not, then could it be sort of reworded so that it's not anti-racism practices? Because from what you sort of describe, it's more about awareness and
early identification.
Yeah,
I think this training, some of it was cultural competency, as far as I understand it. Some of it is about schools who are often the predominance is that the governing body and teaching staff don't necessarily reflect the students and their parents. So it's some of it's about trying to find ways to work together. So there's mutual understanding thing. That's my take.
And I think, you know,
Social differences.
Yeah.
absolutely, and I think obviously I could speak for our organisation, the training we provide for our staff. I think this has very much come from schools. Schools will adopt a different approach. Some schools will say, actually, we want to put some unconscious bias training for our staff. That's a school decision for that school, you know, for the governors, or they may say, actually, we ought to have a real focus on that they may use it as racist practice. It's not for us as a local authority to dictate or anyway say you should run this type of training or that's call it this or that. But they have asked us to bring them together to share good practice.
That's what I think, we should be endorsing unconscious bias training with the civil service.
It's not for us to endorse it,
It's
it's
not-
not our job.
When everybody's speaking at once.
Yeah.
Can we take in turn? Catherine?
It was just when I asked that question about what does it mean, the example I was given, which was rather charming in a way, was of course a lot of schools are talking about teeth and going to the dentist and cleaning their teeth. And then they were talking about the tooth fairy. But of course, a lot of cultures don't have the tooth fairy. So it's being sensitive to things that we all might go, oh, we all know what it is, but half the class have no idea what the tooth fairy. So it was sort of little things like that you're just aware what you're talking about might be not in other people's culture, as to what Councillor Hunt was saying. It's cultural differences that you're just bearing in mind, what they might have eaten or doing or health or anything around those things. And that was how I understood it.
Okay, Tom.
Yeah, just to, I think more information, this would be good, but to reiterate the point that I'd particularly like more information on, because I'm not doubting that there's disproportionality, as I said, you know, in the Timpson report. It says British African children have fewer exclusions, British Bangladeshi children have fewer exclusions, other ethnicities have more exclusions than average. What I am questioning is whether, because at no point in the Timpson report does it recommend that authentic representation through the curriculum is the right way to address this. And if we are, you know, what schools have autonomy to a large degree, I accept that. But if we are promoting anti-racist practice, including ensuring authentic representation through the curriculum, for me, that's quite a big deal. And I would like to see the reasoning and the data behind that and the extent to which we're doing that. So that's what I would like.
Can we draw this sort of line under this and ask officers, yes, to send us some data, but more to the point, to reflect on what's just been said and what was previously said by Catherine and obviously as well. It's perhaps to do more with cultural sensitivity than it is community reasons. But it's maybe to do with sensitivity on a number of different dimensions. And because my experience of this, as it is that it's very rarely one issue. It's a multidimensional issue which reflects the individual child's circumstances. And therefore we have to be sensitive on a number of different dimensions, give any assistance and support to that individual child. You can't have one size fits all solutions. Now that's purely my response to it, but it would be very useful to have officers have a reflection on this. You've got a lot of data, but you've also got a lot of wisdom on this. And I think that the way this is expressed under 4.7 does not really draw out the depth of understanding. It would be useful to reflect on that. So I would like very quickly to ask, because I think we need to finish the time of this report, as to whether there are any other major issues under this report. That's what to bring up.
I'll just say on your very last point there, well, obviously, I think we're all aware that in the law there's more than one protected characteristic. So I think it's acknowledging everything everybody said, and we'd be happy to bring a report back about how schools, you know, with our support and advice, respond to ultimately what that to 10 protected characteristics.
Clear, as far as this committee is concerned today, we've asked for a briefing paper for information purposes. If after reflection you think it's worthy of a presentation report to a future committee, we can take that. But the request that we asked today is just to get a bit of reflective briefing note back to us as a committee.
And the rest of the data we have to have.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I did have one other question on a separate point. Very quickly, just on cyber bullying 2.15, which was C mentioned there. I was just wondering if we're seeing a sort of worrying rise in cyber bullying as a reason for exclusions.
And sorry, may I just ask, I had a similar question. May I just say, would schools ever consider not allowing mobile phones? They come into school, drop them off, and then they're giving them back at the end of the day.
All Saints as well.
Yes,
We do it now.
It's done that
I think-
for a long time.
So I think nationally there are schools piloting things, there are lots of schemes, and so, you know, but there are All Saints and O'Neill, I know he's been in the press, so
Right, yeah.
probably somewhat a
Exactly.
lot. I did text him to Sky News today.
Sorry,
Joking
that it
aside, I
went
think,
back long before, the 12-hour day.
Yeah.
We've had those.
so there's a
for
head
years.
who's in the paper, Kent Online,
Yeah.
first school they get, so I think there are lots of schools trialing it. The APs, all children hand in their phones and all, you know, keys, etc.
Mhm.
But specifically, there was a question. Got a question.
That's a rising issue.
So I think both in terms of anecdotally, I think we don't have any children in our APs who have had a permanent exclusion or a management because of racism. Just as a,
Yes, exactly.
I can tell you that if that's the question you were asking, Sonia. But in terms of cyberbullying, I think we're finding more and more children who have difficulties managing use of phones, and it ends up I'm not sure we can define it as cyberbullying, but it ends up in online conflict. And I think that's resulting in schools finding it more and more difficult. The hardest day in schools is Monday morning, because it's all happening on the weekend.
Yeah.
And kids have had the first opportunity to mix. So are we seeing more and more children? Yes, but anecdotally, not a spike, but there are schools that are sharing. This is
They're slowly growing.
slowly, this is an issue. There are lots of platforms. I'm not going to name them because I'm not that social media savvy, but you know, I keep saying Twitter, that's the only one I know, but there are lots of platforms that kids are using, things are deleted, things get deleted straight away, it's causing problems.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, parents, it's a shared responsibility as we see it. Parents are allowing some, you know, and I know this for a fact, you know, kids are online at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you can see they're online at 2 o'clock in the morning because they, whatever they're doing, messaging, and unfortunately, it's still spilling over into the playground.
I think the other thing that's linked to that, and you're probably experiencing, is the vape. I mean, the vape thing, and it's linked to bullying, and it's linked to all sorts of other things. It's not just, I mean, it's annoying, it's a health issue, obviously, but it's more than that. It's really affecting behaviour.
Right. Thank you very much.
Before you close that, we don't have to get the answer now, but I was about to ask, the Barrow Commission is special advice for parents and children who are facing exclusion. And that's our lovely charity, Sacramento James. My question was about the uptake that could be provided another time, and if they are meeting the current need.
I'm part of the monitoring of that, and I've got a really good report that we can send you and see if you're interested. Yes, it is, and it actually exceeded. And in fact, the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime and Violence Reduction Unit are really interested, and they're coming out to meet us Friday to talk about it as a model. It's an independent advocacy service.
That's Senate James. Yeah, we work quite closely, so they have a big, you know, they work quite closely.
Okay, that's excellent. No one else done. So on this item, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for Wazin.
Cheers, thanks, Greg. See you in the spring.
Yeah.
See you on the 18th.
Thank you very much. No problem. So we can now move on to item A4. Is the response to our reference report, which is the response to the aid in the lift. Didn't in fact then go to the leadership team. So Catherine, if you could lead up on this, I think introduce the list.
On the youth services, yes. So as you will know, when this was initially meant to be coming to the leadership team meeting, I decided to pull it because there were a couple of our voluntary sector partners who weren't happy with what we were proposing. And we didn't want to go ahead without them absolutely understanding what we were proposing and to listen to the further input that they had. And as a consequence of that, we've had in-depth meetings individually with about 3 different charities, particularly we had in-depth meetings with, but then we also had a roundtable meeting at the NatWest Youth Centre where we had 40 different organisations attend. And that was a really helpful session. It was a 2-hour session where everyone again could highlight their concerns about the programme, or just to try and understand what we're doing in this. So it's all in the paper, but just briefly to help people understand it. What we're actually changing here is that we're changing, instead of contracting out, in which the council would say, we're going to give a contract for somebody to run the Langworth Youth Centre, for example. We're now doing grants for our voluntary sector partners to bid in to get a grant. And there are 2 real key reasons to, without going into the whole detail why we're doing this. One is because we have an amazing cohort of voluntary sector organisations here in the borough, but they don't really work together maybe particularly well. There's a bit of sort of we're doing this bit and we're doing this bit, and actually not integrating. And that meant that there were certain cohorts of children and young people who were missing out on services. And particularly we identified obviously girls who weren't accessing our youth club, children with SEND, younger people, and we just wanted to have them to be far more inclusive, that everyone went to them. And so we have we're working alongside Young KNC, who are the organisation that absolutely we work alongside with our HAF programme. So they already know all these voluntary sector organisations because they commission out and give the grants for the holiday and activity programme that take place. So we thought they know best the people on the ground. They know them better than we know. So here's our pot of money, which you'll see is unchanged. And I'm really pleased to see that we've managed to keep the same amount of money with the 6% inflationary interest for this year. From September, if we pass this, it's going to leadership team next Monday. All the different organisations will bid for a grant, not a contract, and that's the sort of key difference, which will be core funding that they can then use like they want to do. So one of the examples I gave at the meeting, which I thought may be quite helpful, but Etienne will put me right if he thinks it isn't, was that taking again the same example of the Langworth Youth Club. There might be somebody that comes forward and says, we want to be the lead person who's run this. But in order to run it and also to use the space more efficiently, because of course, a lot of that space is empty a lot of the time. And we're very conscious that we're not using the space. And it's also an area where Natasha's team does a lot of work in that space anyway. So one group might come and say, well, we'll run these programmes on these days or at this time, but actually we need to bring in a programme that's particularly focused on young girls or particularly focused on more sporting activities, and they will then form partnerships and come together to us to say, here's our proposal for you for how we can fill the space during the week with a much more varied group of things happening there. So this is the concept. The other reason is that Young KNC are a charity, unlike the council. So they can actually leverage the funding that we give them, which you'll see in the paper, to raise more funding. So hopefully, rather than just keeping the amount of funding the same, we will actually be increasing the amount of funding we can give to our youth services and our play groups and everything. But that's a really broad description of it all. I'm sure you've got lots of questions, but before I'll turn it to Etienne, who has done an enormous amount of work. I have to say, you will talk about the amount of consultation. This is going to go on for a year, actually talking to children. And a lot of it has been designed by what our young people have said to us. That was the initial starting point. They said, this is what we want to see more of.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to.
Etienne, before the reason for bringing this back today, not to go back and discuss the whole of the KD as it was, that should have gone to the previous one, subject to the need for extra consultation. The purpose of today, this committee, was last time we gave a response for that in terms of the reference report. So basically, we need to know about the degree of change that is happening in the revised KD, whether that requires us to change our reference report or not. And from what I read, it doesn't. And to get a response from Catherine in relation to the reference report as to how the recommendations we made are going to be addressed, because mostly they were to do with how the leadership team might like to look at the KD or how it is the revised KD. So it's not going back prior to the reference report. It's talking about what's happening over the next week.
Yeah.
And it's purely focused on that.
So I think the thing I will say is that when we did go back to talk to the voluntary sector, the thing that really came out of that for us was actually a lot of organisations in their own fundraising really value the direct relationship they have with us. And so the small amounts of money we give them comparatively to the funds that they generate, it enables them to go to other funders and say, the council values us, they value the outcomes we generate, and we want more money to work for the children in Kensington and Chelsea. And so one of the core changes, I would say, it's small, but it's important, is that while Young Kensington will administer the grant will be between the council and the organisation, so that the money that they then get, rather than it coming from Young Kensington, comes from the council and still enables them to then generate additional income of their own. The other thing I will say is that smaller organisations, we heard really strongly from the roundtable session that they really value this additionality that's coming in terms of funding, because it diversifies the offer and it gives smaller organisations more opportunities. So I think that was the core kind of change to the report. It's a very small change. We've also, from the feedback, we wanted to just in the consultation and also in the risk section, just talk very openly about what the sector registered as risks and how we are then mitigating those risks as well.
I mean, my going back to the key point of today, my view is there's a lot to be scrutinised in this particular decision after the leadership team make up their decision. It's really the question of what alteration to the proposition happened as a result of the reference report and the further consultation. And it is that sort of change that you've just identified, which is very useful to hear it. I think also I understand another aspect is that you were able to communicate some voluntary organisations maybe hadn't totally understood what was being proposed, and you took the time to talk them through it again, so they came quite comfortable with it. And with those two things in place, I'm wondering whether we need to talk about this in much detail, because we really do need to return to this after the leadership team made that, because Catherine, you presents this in the light of the further consultation and the changes that you just identified. But you'll also be in the leadership team giving a formal response to the reference report. And then following that, we'll scrutinise that proposal. So my proposal is that we don't spend a lot of time further discussing this. And then the question is that acceptable to my colleagues?
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay. So if we could then move on to children and young people's plan. Thank you very much, Etienne.
Thank you.
And thank you for an immense amount of work you must have done this week. I understand there were some very long meetings.
You're welcome.
Item 86, therefore. One of the really interesting things at the beginning of the report is the introductory by a member of the Youth Parliament. I thought was a key pointer, which no doubt one or two of your colleagues will pick up on. But we have all read this paper, and that we don't need to rehearse it. But if there are any particular points of introduction that Catherine or one of your colleagues would like to.
Well, I want to start by just saying I really loved this strategy when it first came out, because as we stressed through this, it came from the voice of children, and we listened to them as to what they wanted. And though from what they told us, we have the 7 priorities that are in here. But I love again how it's now presented with very clearly what our key achievements are. So you haven't got to trail through whole bits of paperwork to find those. They're really clearly listed out for you here of what we've achieved and what we want to achieve next year. And you know, I think it's a great form of bringing papers to scrutiny that I hope we see in some of our other papers coming forward. So thank you, Liam, and your team for doing this.
The scope of work is really nice and concise.
It's very concise and really easy to understand.
So if unless anything you want to say, can I open the?
I'm just going to add one point if I may, and you may have more questions.
Yeah.
Between us across Children's Services, we'll have an answer for you, I'm sure. But just in terms of priority 7, children and people affected by the Grenfell tragedy need to be supported. I wanted to find with you, a really current piece of intensive consultation that's been taking place with Grenfell bereaved survivor children, local schools, voluntary sector, really wide ranging, led by Callum Wilson's team. And I think you'll probably all be aware that there is an external scrutiny team that has scrutinised the way in which our colleagues have conducted that consultation. And probably worth saying that whilst the main elements of the Grenfell future funding have been agreed and gone forward, actually the view from the community is more time should be given to the consultation around how the new education and training budget should be spent. Quite a bit of that consultation has happened through the Grenfell Education Fund steering group, I mentioned earlier. We usually meet once a term, and we have done since 2017. This term we've met 3 times because schools have really wanted to talk in detail and to hear from Callum and Lauren and myself and share their feedback on what they think works, in primary and secondary schools. And I wanted to share with you, I think very much follows on the ethos and the way in which this plan develops, that I think we have now got to a set of proposals. Letters went into our schools actually just on Friday, setting out the changes that have been made compared to the original proposals based on feedback. And again, some of you may have picked up some of the feedback we've had. There's actually the support of some of the therapeutic services. I'm just going to mention LCAT as one of them, Latin Community Art Therapy. The feedback was actually this is really hugely valued. So the council is subject to a leadership team decision, is due to extend current arrangements with organisations such as LCAT all the way through to December. The proposal now is to put significantly more funds within the parameters of how the funding can be spent from January into a new model of support. And there's a further fairly extensive period of consultation with the community and schools in the autumn to develop that new model of support, which will be operational from January. So I thought I'd just plug that as a really current piece of information for you all, and it links to the theme of how we co-produce with either people.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So that is coming to leadership team on Monday. So it's another £14 million to be spent over 4 years on restorative justice, particularly for education and training. And Ian's quite right. As like everything, we've gone back to schools, we listened to schools, we have adjusted things to make it more flexible for them. And I recommend that you might, or your committee might like to go and look at that paper that's coming on Monday, to which details out exactly how that money is going to be spent. But as Ian said, it's not the final, because we recognise that we still need to do more consultation with the schools to make it work better with them. So both look at it, but also realise that's not completely set in stone at the same time.
But purely legislative reasons, could we ask officers for an action to record in the minutes today that will circulate a link to that? I know we can find it, but sometimes finding stuff on the class website is an exciting afternoon.
We'll get that sent out to you.
Particularly, I think you can send us a brilliant link on that. Now, I would like to ask colleagues, I think the meat of this is in the report. As I observed the introduction, by the member of the Youth Parliament,
yes,
and refers specifically to this division between what has happened, which is sort of 2/3 of each of the priority pages, and then a quarter or a third at the bottom, which is priorities for the forthcoming year. So if I could go around, Amanda, perhaps you'd like to start. If you pick a priority.
I will, like priority number 3. And I was particularly interested, well, I want to make one point and then ask a question. So having served on the working group around serious youth violence a couple of years ago, I was very gratified to see that a number of concerns that were raised within that report have been acted on and are commented on, and we're seeing the way through that. So I thought that was very encouraging. And then my point of interest was around the Westminster's innovative virtual reality for relaxation wellbeing pilot. And I wanted to know, one, what it was, because it's obviously quite wide-ranging across their borough. And secondly, are we proposing anything similar in RBKC?
Well, to be honest, my jury was out on it, so I wanted to see if it made a difference. And
Yeah.
I need to go and have a look at the evaluation because I haven't looked. But
What is it? What does it do?
So I've seen it for mental health. I haven't seen their one in action yet. I've seen the mental health one, which CNWL were using straight after the disaster, actually, or fairly straight after. And it's goggles, and it's helping people do things that try out things that they're too anxious to do in real life and scenarios. And they were using it. Yeah, that's pretty much what they're using it for. So I think this is the idea is that it's to do that, but I'll go and find out.
I'm very interested to find out what the outcome was. What the
definitely.
analysis was.
Maggie
Thank
was
you.
my opposite number, so I'll go and ask her.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Oh, yeah.
I was also for priority 3, and also priority 1. So just two questions. The first, I'm interested to know a little bit more about the Wednesday group that Kensington Chelsea developed. And then obviously I know I've raised this before, I'm quite happy that next year we'll be focusing on delivering girls groups as an alternative provision. So I just want to know more about those two groups, because they seem sort of similar in a way. And who actually runs them, and how do people know, how do students know where to actually go and that they're available?
Okay.
And what's the sort of incentive when they could be doing something with their friends?
Okay. So the Wednesday
all
group.
of those.
So I run both of those, or my colleagues do.
Yeah.
So the Wednesday group we developed in our new adolescent service.
Mhm.
And what we've done is we did a review of services that were with the young people who were most likely to get excluded, imprisoned, come into care, or be harmed and exploited. And when we looked at those children and where they landed, which services, obviously social work localities, but also the youth justice team that I run, 2 prevention teams and an education care team called Families Forward. Prevention teams are the prevention of NEAT, employment training, and DOT, detached outreach. So they were landing in those services, but we often, when I reviewed it with colleagues, we found that we weren't coherent enough. So depending on where you landed, you got the service from that team, but you wouldn't necessarily access, for example, the education psychologists who work for us in the youth justice team.
Mm-hmm.
So we agreed to have a way of, wherever they landed, thinking together about them as a whole system for adolescents, and then thinking about where we saw gaps in services. And one of the gaps, particularly for boys, for the Wednesday group, was we've got boys who can't go to the mainstream youth clubs. They've either been excluded from them, or their gang issues, for want of a better, and the exploitation issues mean they really shouldn't. They're not safe. So we run it on Wednesday evening in Oxford Gardens, which is the base for most of our adolescent services. It's got a systemic therapist who's doing music with them. So a lot of them would have done music at youth clubs, but they can't go to them. There's loads of different exercise options. They're also doing loads of life skills and getting job stuff. So I've got people coming in from the TPT, the NEATS team, and the DOT. So it's a multidisciplinary team working with young people. We actually made a video for Youth Justice Partnership where one young person talked about, 2 young people talked about why it made a difference. We hope to then land them back in community resources when they're safe. But to be honest, it takes quite a long time because a lot of them have got quite entrenched and quite high risk behaviour, unfortunately, and exploitation. So that's that group. And that would also be a springboard because we've got the workers doing employability. And employability, if we can get them into something, it's one of the biggest ways of creating persistence and a pathway out of offending.
Do they, out of interest, would they sort of come one Wednesday and decide, no, it's not for me, I'm never coming back again? Or is it sort of regular?
It's regular, and it's regular because they're workers who are working, because we work very intensively with that cohort. They're normally saying, particularly the justice team, they might see their work twice a week. So we're working on getting them there. And I mean, what might sound a bit shocking is some of them are, very street oriented in terms of they're out with peers who and older people are exploiting them. But others have become so frightened because of the risks of seriously violence and exploitation, they're stuck in their bedrooms. So it's also we're trying to engage them into where life needs to go.
And VAP, you asked about the girls group.
Yes, which now sounds entirely different.
It is.
So more about.
So that's in the alternative provision. So I guess that's something that Ormiston is delivering. Is that correct?
Yeah.
It's down at the bottom. It's what we're going to do next year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, sorry, yes. In fact, my colleagues from Detached Outreach and the TPT, the LEAP team, are going to go and work alongside them because we've been running some girls groups for girls who, again, don't go to some clubs for all sorts of other sort of exploitation reasons.
Okay. And then the other question I have is entirely different, but in priority outcome one, it says reception year ABC rates have decreased by 4%. I remember last year, I think we reviewed a report that had OBC rates and they did not look very good in the older years. So I was wondering if we had that data, if we've seen it, not for obviously it's improved in this reception year, but for older people's, whether it's improved or what we're doing about it.
Just to say, we have I must put you on the spot, Jeff, but we have a colleague, Jeff, our Deputy Director of Public Health. And I don't know if you wanted comments on that question, Jeff.
So I've just had a look at the
There's quite a lot of work we're doing with public health.
If it's up to hand, that's fine, yeah.
We
That's
can
fine.
send that through to you.
Yeah.
I think it's probably worth saying, Jeff, that we've got a lot of activity on this with public health in that area to try and combat that issue, which we know is a challenge for us locally.
And we just check the notice of action. Right, surety.
Natasha, just one thing. On the Wednesday club, how many young adults turn up on a regular basis?
5 to 6,
5 to
probably
6.
as many as we want, really.
Right.
Every time you add somebody else in, there's a whole set of friendship dimensions and relationships.
Yes.
We have to think, who are they safe? We even have to think about things like, where do they exit? We have security guards in that building. We've also got night wanting. I mean, so it's small, but it kind of, I think it's probably about the maximum.
Right, and they most of them return on a weekly basis. Yeah, right, okay. Thank you.
Which priority did you want to pick?
Sorry, that was on priority 1.
Priority one.
Yeah, so and then I just have one on priority 4. We have the Westminster at the bottom of the page, just above the head of the figure. Is that the Westminster Employment Service have a wide range of training programs, and it goes on, digital marketing, social media, all that. I just wanted to know if there is something similar in RBKC.
So targeted prevention team that I run does the same job that Westminster Employment does for that cohort. They don't have the same team over in Westminster. It's targeted prevention. And we do some of these courses, short courses, actually some of it's funded by COVID recovery funds, cost of living fund, so like digital marketing. But we also link in, because we're by the borough, we also sometimes work, so for example, Alliance we work with. So it's a sort of mixed market. And there's quite a lot of things like Sphere. We work with a load of different offset providers here. So it's, I share the officers board that meets every quarter. We share all of those ideas and knowledge every quarter between us and Westminster, so it's by borough, because we're so close together, it makes sense to kind of share opportunities with young people.
And we also obviously work locally with our own team, led by Graham Barnes as well.
Yeah,
So,
I was just about to say, I mean, only yesterday we had a very long brainstorming meeting as how we could improve bringing all the different parts of the council together, because of this sits with about three different areas, and it's always the problem of who is holding the ring, so everyone knows where to access it. So we're working on that.
Yes, we want to refine our employer relationships.
Yeah.
Can I just, it is an anecdotal, but we will have some data that I know we'll be sharing with the local authority at some point. And it pertains, I think, to priority 4, which is the 12-hour school day, 7 to 7 school day at all stands. We finished the pilot now. Part of what we have every year at the end of our academic year, a governor's afternoon, where we see the school mission in action, as that school calls its vision and values. And part of that, we had a tea with the children that would normally stay for their dinner at sort of 6 o'clock going on to 7 in that all-day provision, and we talked to them about what they liked and what they most would miss and what they hoped we would do. And one of the things, so friendships and being with people in a safe environment was the number one point, but also they specifically were talking about life opportunities and skills and some of the activities that we have after school that you just can't have during school time, that exactly the sort of things you're talking about providing. It's just easier in a school at the end of the day, as long as they're happy to be there and you make it fun and attractive enough for them.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And that was absolutely one of the things we were focusing on last night, is how we can use our delivery partners to do things at schools after school while the children are there. But just I'm asking you actually now, somebody then said that children don't like staying late at schools in the winter. Do you think that's true?
We had exactly that discussion. The children all want to.
Right.
And they are talking about not feeling safe. So they're either going to be locked up in their bedroom with their mobile phone because I will say that this pilot did not include, shall we say, the most vulnerable or ones who might not make this work. It included a good percentage of children who were very engaged with the school and wanted to further engage, but might have been vulnerable in their home situations, if you understand. They all want to stay on, and I think we're agreeing to do September. It's the parents who have the concerns, particularly the younger children. So once you got to sort of October and onwards, when the clock changes, I guess. So I think it's very unlikely to be offered to the end of the winter, but would start up again maybe time. So, but it's exactly the same thing that you're going to have with all this. Presumably, parents don't like children accessing these youth clubs.
Exactly.
Then it's the same.
But it emphasises one of the key things about schools. It's, whenever you talk to the NHS or to budget providers or whatever, they're always amazed at the footprint school has for the child.
Yeah.
It's 30 plus hours a week.
Yes.
And you'd be lucky with your GP if you get 35 seconds or 35 minutes. But it's the footprint that's there, and if it's made fun and it involves food, because they often don't get food at home or not
and nice. It's better food. They got better food even than the school lunches. The stuff they want to eat. Yeah. What was particularly delightful were things that in homes where you've got parents who have the time to devote to the children, and some of our parents, they're doing 2 jobs or shift work or whatever, single parent families, etc. The meal was always accompanied by games and things. So they were all sitting around with no access to mobile phones, no wish to access mobile phones, playing all the stupid board games that we all know, that we played ourselves, that we played with our children, and absolutely loving it. And also playing it with some of the teachers. And it was a wonderful way of them breaking down the barriers, authority figures as nice people in an appropriate setting.
Amanda, you say you're just coming to the end of a pilot. Are you going to write this up or have it?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. The school analyse stage appropriate will share it with the local authority.
Could when you get to the point you're comfortable sharing, could you circulate it to this committee? That would be
absolutely,
because maybe this is something we ought to have another look at as a committee. But if we, for the moment, can ask the officers to.
Absolutely, and I'm sure Andrew and Neil, head teacher, would be delighted to speak to anything you wanted.
Really briefly, to just draw out a broader point, which I think we hear in terms of our SEND local offer. We've heard it through the long-standing, the long-running youth consultation is not enough of our families, young people, are aware of the range of provision here in Kensington Chelsea. So it absolutely would, and we really look forward to seeing more of the findings and other parts of all saints. But actually, I hope some young people, and then you also run some activities through North Kensington Library that's nearby. So is there now hopefully perhaps a greater awareness of what's on offer in our libraries? Because traditionally, parents of younger children, 0 to 5, the strong, so actually getting teenagers to access, an offer from the libraries, including the lending of games that you mentioned.
Yes,
And that is our ongoing priority for for us wants the committee to know to promote the offer we've got, because some young people say, actually, yeah, the Wednesday group spot on for me. Actually, it's the library offer, it's the school
Yes,
offer,
yes.
it's the promotion of the range of alternatives, frankly, that will suit different young people and at different ages.
Can I just respond to the library point? Again, going back to my experience on exclusion panels, sometimes it can be the frustration that children have that builds up over time of the lack of space, privacy, and peace and quiet in their own homes.
Yeah.
And making sure that they understand that libraries aren't just for going and swatting in,
Yes.
reading books that they may not want to read, that it can be a refuge for them if they don't have the space, would be very helpful, I think. Sorry, Sonny.
I was just going to say, very quickly, I mean, how to incentivize, especially the teenage years, you know, to go to the library or to go to a club, because you know they might say, oh, it's a bit uncool, or so how do you get around that?
Well, one of
Yes,
these
yes.
was what we was this game session.
Yes.
So that's been so effective in Warhammer. So you are actually going and doing something physical in a library that's fun. You know, we're not saying read an academic book
Yeah.
or, you know, it's not hard work. Libraries can be fun and safe and quiet. And that's, you know, I think it's been bigger success than we even thought it was going to be, hasn't it?
Indeed, and also, you know, running in school libraries too. And I think there the example would be, you know, we love our, you know, our loan rates, our issue rates to be higher.
Yeah.
Where we've got games, you know, tabletop games, so that actually loan rates are really high.
Yeah.
So that's saying we've maybe got teenagers who wouldn't normally go into a
Yes,
library,
exactly.
going in to say, I want to borrow that game, and
Yeah.
you know, obviously, and we've had more donated, so that feels like something that we can continue to
Maybe
innovate
that's sort
with.
of sharing an experience between our libraries and our school libraries.
Well, the games team for the libraries are also going to the school, so they're also going into All Saints. So again, that they might get their interest there and go, oh, that we enjoy playing the games there after school. But now we want to continue that, so we're going to the library and do it.
Can I go on
Yes,
to
thank you.
Councillor Noor? Which topic would you like?
Priority number 3, please.
Please.
This may not directly relate only this department. May be crossover from other council departments like community safety, other things and communities. Is children being safe on our streets, online. I mean, we had the unfortunate shooting on week before at the back of K, and that was before, you know, the shooting in Ladbroke Grove and other incidents. Is there any data available, or can we ask if that can be put together? Because I know this cross-party police, community safety, your department, maybe communities.
Absolutely.
What numbers are available to us in terms of incident related to gun crime, knife crime, antisocial behaviors? It is all related because now Latimer Road is a hotspot in terms of drug dealing.
Yeah.
So if we can get some figures, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. And if it's any reassurance for members, our Director of Children's Services, Sarah Newman, chairs the Borough Serious Youth Violence Board, which includes our community safety colleagues, our communities colleagues, our police colleagues, etc., schools, probation, and we regularly review the data. The data looks quite low. However, we know every single incident affects a huge amount of people, whether it's the family directly affected or the community's confidence. So in no way, although the data low, do any of us think it's not an important issue. And also we're trying that the strategy that underlies that and the actions are about prevention as much as them reacting to an incident. Everything from training our youth clubs how to prevent and manage an incident on their premises, through to identifying children early on, as we've talked about. So absolutely, we've got data view and we can happily share that. And I think it's probably scrutinised by whichever board, whichever scrutiny committee looks at community safety, but I'm sure they wouldn't.
So it's probably strictly not this community, and I think this is an issue of scrutiny we need to resolve. whether it is in housing communities or whether it should be an OSD.
OSC,
Yeah.
community safety.
So I think maybe that question and the input goes to OSC.
Yeah, if you wanted specifically to look at children, we would be able to do that here.
Or we can give you
General.
we break the data down into under 19s and over, so we can
Okay.
Okay.
give you that.
Because Chair, on previous was discussed, covering comments of, the youth review, where we will share resources and, they utilize the council buildings. We have cases where children in one party forget about the south, North Kensington, are not keen enough to go to the particular area because of those issues.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's a very good point made. I think, Tom, did you have?
Yeah, just had a question on point 4. Okay, that's right, Chairman. And my question's about vocational training. And there's an anecdote I heard from a different local authority. I just wondered if we share some of these challenges. So this is from an employer, a house builder, who said he was invited along to a careers day at the local school. Kids engaged with it really well. Lots of people interested. He ended up taking on a few of them, big company through their pathways, and some, after school went and worked for this company. And it seemed very successful, got great feedback. But then after, I don't know if it was after 1 or 2 years, the headmistress said to him, "No, sorry, we can't have you anymore, because basically I'm being judged negatively because I've got kids not going into university, but going in vocational routes instead." And I don't know if that's parents feeding back to her saying, my kid could have gone to university, you've encouraged them to go on a vocational route, or if that's the school board. But is that a challenge, whether it's stigma or metrics or lower percentage going to university, more going to vocational routes?
Well, I think in terms of requirements for schools are required pre-16 to give ensure that independent information, advice and guidance is provided about a whole range of routes at post-16 and post-18. And actually through my conversations with secondary heads who meet regularly, they always they invite, and they don't have to invite the principal of our local sixth form college, for instance. So I think our local schools are very open to making sure, and I suppose you can't always invite every employer, and some schools may run a careers fair, others may invite fairly help colleagues to support it, but there is a requirement for schools not just to promote their own sixth form, and then in the sixth form, not just to promote a route into university. And it's worth saying, given our very high academic achievement here in KNC, mainly by young people, are looking at a route into A levels post 16. They are looking at a route into university, often Russell Group at post 18. But I think increasingly our schools are seeing the importance of also saying, and there are other pathways too, routes into apprenticeship, routes into local colleges, as well.
One of the key things that I've observed is that work experience and the ability to put together a CV is absolutely vital.
Yes.
I have one child who got a first class honours to a very good university in London, and then it took a year to get a job, being paid fairly minimal amount. In fact, the first job he had to take for free to get work experience, or he could get apply to another job. And even now, he's not very well versed in how to advance his career in terms of using experience. Now, other children do very well not going to university, getting work experience, getting jobs, and so on. So I think this is an area that does need to be explored. It's not just the jobs fair and the alternative routes and the traditional streams. It's that first job, first work experience, even if it's going down to your local pub and serving under the counter, because you get money skills, you get people skills, and work towards your first interview with a more traditional job. So I think at the moment we as parents made the mistake of thinking that a first class honours degree was a shoe into an automatic career, where not anymore.
Yeah, I think we're very, very aware of that, and it's exactly the piece of work that we're doing, that I've been trying to do for 5 years. We are going to get that. But to your point, Tom, I mean, there is a stigma attached. I mean, I think there was only 1% of our school children take up apprenticeships, which is extraordinary given what a fantastic opportunity they are. But if you imagine that this is the first child, you know, in the family that's likely to go to university, that the families are really proud about that, and it's a great achievement for them. And I met her at Chelsea Academy last year when they were all doing their A-levels, and there was an incredibly bright child there who was going to do a graduate apprenticeship. And I was going, that's fantastic. But even so, the others were going, you know, why are you doing that? Why don't you go to university? So, and we used to have actually a member of staff here who just talked about apprenticeships and went to all our schools, talked about apprenticeship, but we still didn't really manage to shift the numbers of children to take up that route. So there is a lot more work that we need to do. But actually the Earls Court Development Centre, there's a whole centre there, which is really great. We're talking about construction. So, you know, if any children want to go in construction, they can go and pass their initial tests, so they're safe to go on site. They can do all sorts of training that's coming as part of that.
Some of those schemes will allow you to earn from day one, start getting life experience and working experience, but will also set aside time for training. You can go in to get tech qualifications, but some of them also enable you to do a degree. And you can go to a very high quality degree. I mean, a girl I heard of and went in to do that kind of arrangement with nursing, and she's going to come out with a really good degree at the end of it, which will enable her to go on to further academic training if she wishes to advance her career within the NHS.
Without debt as well.
And probably worth saying, I think we've absolutely got a role to play here as a large employer locally, and we do promote apprenticeships, routes into apprenticeships, partnership work with local colleges such as Morley. I am going to say we're really proud of leading our supported internship program for young people with education, health and care plans, their own role.
Ian, can I ask you, in a further occasion rather than now?
Yes.
I get the sense that actually this is a very interesting area for the committee. Maybe we could, when we talk in the next agenda item, we could add this to our thoughts, and maybe we could gather some information and some case studies which would help dispel some of the myths in this. Because if we were able to identify some young people who started earning 15,000, 20,000 a year after they left school at 17, or prior even to getting A levels or whatever, because they went into an apprenticeship arrangement. They, with no debt, but their sort of financial profile by the time they're 25 is very, very different. And I suspect that their profile through the rest of their career will be just as powerful if they're able and hardworking.
I think there are figures to back that.
But you don't think there are figures?
There are figures. They still do the graduates.
And I think it's more. It's a bit of a. Sorry.
No, not carry on.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's a bit of a difficult fight because it's almost parental aspiration.
Yeah, it is.
And then how do you? It's not just stigma for the children. I think children don't really think about it. It's more parental aspiration. Every parent wants their child to go to university. Or you must get, you've got all this facility. And I think that's the tricky part. Where the apprenticeship might not.
But I think it's worth testing the ground.
Yes, absolutely. No, absolutely.
But I think it's more, as we were saying, I think something like 90% of our children go to university. So we have an incredible high grade going to university. But it's as we're focusing on who are the 10% that aren't, and how can we support them the most? And is it they need the most basic skills that you were talking about to do interview practice? How do you apply? How do you do your CV? All that sort of thing. How do you, not get fed up and hate the job after day one and stick with it? So all that sort of stuff. So that's the sort of piece we're really working on now. And what are their routes? How do we give them more information and trials and work experience and all those things? Because we recognise it's incredibly important.
And how does the headmaster justify on the children that the head has picked? My child is as clever as the other one. Why have they been identified as somebody who could do an apprenticeship and not go to
They
university.
wouldn't be picked in the school.
No.
They have careers evenings
Yeah.
with parents sitting there, the children
No.
sitting there.
Oh,
It's
no,
a
of
whole
course, absolutely.
conversation.
No, absolutely, but still, I mean, you know, parents, yeah.
And there is now, the Department of Education does publish destination data with
Yes.
school. So it's really interesting to see that breakdown of progression. What we are seeing locally is year on year, more of our year 11s who may live in the borough or elsewhere, more of them are staying on for local post-16 progression,
Yeah.
Either in sixth forms or we've got a couple of 11, 16 schools. Increasingly, they do want to go to Morley College. So some of the local schools, sixth form, also some Charles sixth form, and that's great for us.
Yeah.
And they do need extra support, they're local, and Natasha's early help team can provide further advice.
So one thing is, it's a question, it was on actually in the inclusion paper, but it comes here to you. I didn't ask it then. There was a reference to schools transitioning some children at risk potentially of exclusion into Morley College as a little taster sessions, etc. But it also pertains to this here. So we've done that at All Saints. Tremendously encouraging. So certain children we identified as just not engaging, say, with the academic side of school, but really wanting more the vocational side. The issue, though, and we've been glad to support it on the board, is actually costly.
Yeah.
Because we have to send a teacher with those children. So that's quite a big thing. And I wondered if there might be something if the local authority recognises as being something that would be very valuable, whether there might be some funding around that.
There has been so a couple of years ago now, as you know, a lot of evacuees were living temporarily in the borough, and there was some money from the Department of Education to support them. And for many of those young people, actually they really keen to learn, attend local school, but they needed support with their English, and we were able to use the DFE money, passported some of our local schools and for some of our local colleges to provide that support. But you're absolutely right, of course it costs money. So a college can absolutely provide with a bit of funding, 14 to 16 provision, and they can provide that pastoral support separate, separate lunchtime base to the post 16s and so on. But that is a challenge. Some schools are purchasing that part-time provision, and it's really helping those young people think about post 16 and local progression. But there is a cost, and the local authority isn't funded to support with that. But we very much try and broker the partnerships with the colleges to think about those routes. And so there was a one-off pot of funding, particularly for academic activities.
Maybe in the future now.
We'll see.
Who knows?
Okay, I think we covered this paper. Thank you very much indeed. And we look forward to the next group of forecast. A nice presentation.
Yeah.
Having feedback to those who are involved in the presentation as well as the content, right? Just as the administration. So thank you very much. I think it's us because our own internal arrangements. Thank you for your long stay.
I'll stick with it for the work plan. Happy to. Okay, advice.
Right, so that's
Thank you very much.
now this paper, if I may steer people colleagues toward page 52, which is effectively, you read the paper as a whole, it describes how we're making choices. At the previous meeting that we had, looking at priorities, we identified the 9 plus 2 standing items that have been put on page 52. I would like to say something about items 2 and 3 to start with, and then ask a question. The item 2 is a proposal that we don't do a lot of work, and we don't ask officers to do a lot of work. Out of the some of the papers we've been looking today, and out of the experience we've had on doing a working group on the 0 to 11 working group from last year, which still needs to be concluded, we found that looking at a timeline and certain key points on that timeline, an extremely useful way of positioning the work that lots of other agencies do. And it has the pictogram that we got at the end of the on page 35, this triangle, which positioned all the different pieces of work within that paper, which took about 7 or 8 pages to describe. Actually, visually, there it's very pertinent. What this is not a substitute for the detailed description, but it does show how things relate to each other. And the purpose of item 2 here is to ask officers to put together a pictogram that goes from 0 to 18. And so this shows the transitions, if you like, at prenatal, rising fives, and at 11 when you're going from primary to secondary, and then the transition into adulthood at 18. And to try to present the different programs that we've been talking about in a simplified pictorial arrangement. The purpose of this is that I believe that in the same way as on that triangular of need thing, it'll give us a snapshot of how the different projects we're looking at, both previous scrutiny, current and potentially future scrutiny, can fit into this, because we can't scrutinize everything all the time. But what we can do, if we take an overview, is to look at where the pressure points are, or the points of particular interest, or points that have been in the public interest, or in our, residents and voluntary sector groups and so on. And I mean, because I remember the initial conversation when I put forward as the chair of the working group to Sarah Newman, had a conversation with her about what was important about 0 to 11 time span. And she said, actually, if you look at rising fives and where people are, you look backwards at what's happened from prenatal to there, and you look forward as what's needed for the next section. It's a very good point. And then I talked to a couple of the teachers and so on, and they said, school readiness and, all the early intervention stuff, the work that can happen in childcare and nursery, especially if they're integrated into schools as well, with the same curriculum and structure and so on. So there's lots to be gained by having the right points to look at. So that's that particular job, and it's going to be an ask to officers, and I need to talk about it with our support team first before we ask the question. So, that's not a final formulated view, but we will try to put something around that internally, circulate it to members for comment, and then put it to you as an ask. So that may not be a paper, it may just be a piece of background information, but we hope that might be useful to you as well as us, and in particular in communicating between the parts.
We can become more done about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Now, on the number 3, transformations, transformations at the moment sits with OSC. Maxine Holdsworth has agreed as the Chief Executive Officer to come back to OSC to give an update to the next, I think it's the next OSC it's coming to, a report on the progress with transformations. Transformations, in summary, is the looking at the way you do things in your directorship or business stream, improving the efficiency of it such that you reduce costs, A, to deal with the financial pressures, but B, also, in fact, to get efficiencies beyond that, so that you can reinvest in improving the quality of service that you give. This was the definition that Johnny Palasitis, as the budget head in the leadership team, came up with. Maxine will be reporting on that to OSC across corporately. What I propose is that under this piece of work, that we take that corporate response, the medium-term financial strategy update, which describes the future problems to do with financial pressures, and we send that to Sarah Newman and colleagues and say, how are you going to respond? How are you responding to this in FCS, in our case? So we look at the transformations issue and the budgetary issue, and what's being done at the moment in terms of developing the service for next year to respond to those issues. And we would like a response to that fairly quickly by the beginning of the autumn. So that we, in effect, it'll upskill us in understanding the questions we need to address during the budget preparation period, which is effectively September to November. Because by November, officers have to have further proposals for scrutiny and then legislative decision through January. And I think a lot is already happening. I think we've heard issues. I think the youth review is youth provisional review is one of those transformation issues. And there are other things that I know are happening. And there are things happening. There are initiatives being taken by schools. Amanda's described one. We certainly got some in we're benefiting from the bringing together of nursery and early years daycare under the same governance and curriculum development, and the synergies that brings to the piece. That not everybody can have co-location on one site because this government doesn't work. So the methodology here is that transformations, we will wait to hear from vaccine. We will then put that together with the report also on medium-term financial strategy, and Sarah Neiman for a response, Sarah Neiman team for a response as to how they're doing things at the moment. Produce a report for our first meeting in the autumn. So that's what we'd like to do. Now, this list is topics, and there's more detail in the subsequent pages where they come from. What I basically want to ask the question tonight is not to have a detailed discussion of this, but are colleagues happy with this, if you like, a broad agenda for us for the year? If you are, we just decide that much tonight, and our support team will help us develop projects out of that and papers out of that and focus them time-wise through the year, because they will consult with officers as to when it'd be good to address these subjects, because some of them are ready to be scrutinised now and some of them won't be ready to be scrutinised until the spring, and so on. So in effect, the simple question is, are you happy with the list of topics as on page 52?
Just one other topic, Chairman, which might be cross-cutting, might be a subset of two, or might be a separate topic, which is around looked after children, looking at them in more detail, particularly sort of adoption rates, how good are we getting at getting kids adopted, and also outcomes for kids who aren't adopted. And I don't know if that sits best as a cross-cutting thing or as its own issue.
Could I comment on that, Chair? It's a really, really helpful question. I think you've been used to seeing our children and young people's plan dashboard, where we set out our key data with some analysis, and all that data is there. What I would say, and I know Sarah, you would want me to say, we sat in this room with Ofsted just a couple of weeks ago at our annual engagement meeting. Ofsted will have confirmed they will be coming to carry out a short inspection, but a graded inspection of children's services, very much looking at that data. And it's absolutely right that you would want to look at that data anyway, but particularly in the context of an impending inspection, I would absolutely suggest that might be an area you'd want to look at some of our core statutory work within children's services, within family services, some of our data, and by all means ask us some questions, put in some challenge around that. So really happy, probably through the dashboard. Would be my advice if that's helpful. Okay. in the some.
And that's partly in answer to Tom's point, but also partly in answer to the listeners.
And I think you may find it says some of the data that you're keen to interrogate, some of that will be in our overview dashboard, which I know it's slightly different composition of the committee, but it's been to committee previously. So we'd really have to bring that back and answer questions about it.
So that we make that an addition to the early conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, it could come into, because we did look at looked after children since last municipal year, but it could come into the performance information. As Ian was saying, and it links into safeguarding as well, which will be coming in autumn.
That's right. That will come every year, exactly as well as says. Particularly the reports are writing on local safeguard insurance partnership will come anyway.
That's a very good suggestion in terms of timing. Yeah. And yours very good suggestion in terms of that item of positioning in that. I come back to the question, subject to this point. Are we happy with the list of items we have here, Councillor Lunn?
I think generally yes, Chair. But on item 4, and this is my personal interest, I follow children with statements in our schools. So when after speech language therapy, OT, everything in the school input, a child has been given a plan, then that goes to their school, whether it's primary or secondary. Then you got a legal element attached to it that it has to have every year annual review.
That's right.
So my interest is really and this is one of the things I picked up through the case work families I work with, is not all the schools, but some schools, after the child has that plan, that child becomes a number in the class. So they don't receive what the plan said they're supposed to receive. So how, as a borough, are we collecting that feedback from parents and schools and seeing the money we spend on those children spend the way it's supposed to be?
That's the job of one of my teams in the SEN service. Children have education, health and care plans. There's about 800 residents, 0 to 25, who have one of those plans. And we have had some additional funding in through the DFE, through what's called our Delivering Better Value programme, to, I suppose, support schools in making sure that the top-up funding is being spent to meet the needs identified in the plan. Again, I'm mindful of what's already on your list here, Will, and what will we bring, but it's probably worth saying that probably not by the end of this calendar year, but definitely the next couple of years, we will also be inspected for SEND and alternative provision offer, and they'll be looking at exactly those kinds of issues. So, if time allows, we could of course bring our SEND self-valuation, which I was just talking to our lead member about today, and that highlights what we think as a local area we're doing well at. So one area would be, it's still a challenge supporting schools and colleges to do annual reviews on time, and if they think changes need to be made, getting that information to us on time so we can amend the plan. So if there is, I know we've spoken quite a bit about alternative provision today, and I hope that's been helpful. But if in terms of SEND provision, you'd like to look at that maybe through the medium of our self-evaluation, we'd be really happy to bring that back.
I think both Abdul Hadi's question and your answer are extremely useful additions to item 4.
Yeah.
Rather than making it a separate item,
absolutely.
additions to. And I would like officers to take that on board, but also to think through and maybe discuss further with you, Ian, and your colleagues, as to how we can, which these, if you like, are it's a succinct topic heading.
Yes.
It's not a proper description or work proposal. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for the answer.
And if I could say, actually, our SEND self-evaluation will also encompass key elements of item 5 around mental health and emotional wellbeing, mental health support, particularly where there is a more clinical need for support. So I hope we could draw that into that item.
Yeah, that's probably the higher need end of mental health support.
Yes.
But I sense that there's also a general provision of mental health becomes part of the education process. Teaching our children how to deal with social media events and things, as well as banning them from using them in class. And then there's a tricky one, which is how much you put into intermediary need. Because if you could put too much, you spend a lot of money. If you don't spend enough, the intermediary need migrates to the high need. So that's the big judgment.
And our SEND self-evaluation also talks about the various tiers of support, mental health support teams in schools.
Okay.
What's ordinarily available. It's that same triangle approach that we can share.
Is it possible to separate entirely SEND provision 4 and mental health 5? I mean, I'm wondering whether if we had a meeting where even if there were separate papers, they could be talked about at the same meeting because of some cross-fertilization.
Seems to me we should be considering
alongside each other, even and there's be a judgment we can develop with officers as to whether they're actually part of a bigger paper or whether they're separate papers but have common elements.
But it just seems to me, if you're doing a particular piece of work already that involves a lot of it, what we don't want to have to do is a huge amount of work that replicates in some way.
And I think our SEND self-evaluation, absolutely, we've just spoken about the young people with the highest level of need with education, health and care plans, but our self-evaluation also looks at that far bigger group of children identified, as we heard earlier, as SEN support. And so that's very much where you would capture support around emotional wellbeing and mental health at a less complex level of need.
The mental health would also involve potentially hospital school data.
Absolutely, yes. Or given its send and alternative provision, it's always just officially asking the school is part of our alternative provision offer.
I'd like to comment on number 8, if I may, saying that there is a cross element there with the Environment Select Committee. And we basically want to have some progress report on how the Greening Schools programme is being, how it's going. Because I understand the sort of different phases have different budgeting elements, because the first phase proved rather expensive. So whether it, and we need an update on that and how it affects the operation of schools and the provision of good conditions as well, and also sensible running costs.
Yes.
We're not trying to rerun the ESC's environment. I mean, I chaired that at one point. We're not trying to redo that work for ESC.
And just on the chat, I could talk a bit more to develop, but I'll start work on that. Work is overseen by the environment team. They draw down the funding for it. They work with the property team. They keep us up to speed. Now, Catherine goes to visit the schools where work has happened, but it's not. That's not an area that's kind of, if you like, run by children's services. But we can talk about where that might be and really scrutinised.
We'd also like assurance on some of the difficulties in terms of property team support of schools.
Should we be considering it though?
I think so, because it has a radical effect on the running costs of schools, and therefore budgetary arrangements.
All of the priorities for all of the different select committees are going to be discussed at OSD as well. So if there is crossover, that will be discussed there, and which scrutiny committees is most appropriate. Yeah.
And even if it is led by ESC, we can have a briefing report for our members, specifically looking at in detail schools. So it doesn't have to be an agenda item or a working group or anything. That's what we can have a light touch report.
Like that, yeah.
But that I'll take advice from officers on how that sorts out. Okay. Any other major points on this, or are we okay with it otherwise? Yeah. Great. Thank you very much.
So can I clarify? Are you confirming and the priorities as they're listed in that appendix with an addition of looked after children, or are you happy that that would be covered in safeguarding or something? And then you can determine afterwards at what point that's scrutinised, or are you adding priority?
And the looked after children is going to be covered in your 2 different.
As a safeguard, so what always comes, we kind of have to come, you kind of have to scrutinise that. So that will traditionally come towards the end of this calendar year.
Safeguarding and performance.
So safeguarding and support for looked after children, particular reports that will come later.
And that would include things like adoption rates for this.
Yes, it will, but also, as I've suggested, the dashboard will also be a route into that conversation. Yeah,
great. And we agreed that there would be a grouping of 4 and 5 together, then they still remain separate.
And that we would consider one item more speedily, but an imminent inspection.
Yeah, but it was a self-evaluation report.
So that was on SEND, which I mean, obviously you'll decide your priorities. That inspection won't come as soon as our children's services, i.e. our social care inspection. So I'll come back to my original point about having a look at our children's services dashboard, and by all means put some scrutiny on some of the data there and some of our analysis.
It'd be wise for us to plan that in earlier rather than
yes, exactly.
We produce that quarterly, we share it with our lead member. Really happy to bring it here.
Great. Okay, that's action. Are you happy to look at the question?
Yeah.
Do we answer the rest of your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Right. So, members, I think we've reached the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well.
It's late. It was timetable to be